acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that each of us are coming from today, the traditional owners from all over Australia. And I'd like to pay my respects to leaders past, present, and emerging. And I would also like to welcome our first speaker today, the incredible Cathy Dimarchos. Welcome, Cathy.
Hello. Bit of energy, right?
Absolutely. Cathy, for people who haven't met you before, would you please introduce yourself and tell us a bit about you and what it is that you do?
Thank you, Peace. It's actually really a pleasure to be here and a pleasure to actually be part of this community. For me, gosh, where do I start? My background is actually 30 odd years in finance, in business, in scaling businesses. Through that period, I actually decided that I needed to do a little bit more. So I also became a qualified counsellor. And I'm also trained in psychological safety in the workplace. So that really tells you a little bit about my skills, but maybe not so much about why I do what I do and how I do that. And I think that's what I want to actually share today. A little bit of that and giving you a little bit of insight out and how I actually push forward through things.
Beautiful, Cathy. Well, I might let you get things underway. If people have questions, shall I ask them to save them and we'll do questions at the end? Would that work for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Beautiful.
Well, take it away. The floor's yours.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. So bear with me as I do that. Okay, how's that for you now? Can you see that?
Yep, that's great.
We're good?
Yes.
All right.
I've got an echo there, Cathy.
You've got an echo. Let me put my headphones in. That might actually help. How's this? Does this sound better?
Sorry, that was my echo.
Oh, okay.
Don't mind me. Keep going.
Oh, am I good like that?
You're good to go.
Okay.
My apologies.
It's all good. All right. So I guess this session is actually really giving us a different lens to look at things. So my question, I guess, for you to think about is if D actually stood for drive and F actually stood for fear or failure, what actually sits in between in that letter E? And E doesn't necessarily need to start with an E, but I'm using that as part of, I guess, the way to enable you to think about things. So, what we actually do in life, and I'm just going to move this slightly, the impact that you actually have is really around the commitment that you actually put into that bit that sits in between. We all have drive. That's why we're actually entrepreneurs. That's why we run our own businesses. And that's not to say that people who are employees don't have drive, but it takes that little bit extra to actually have determination, drive, grit when you're actually self-employed. And then the bit that actually is really important is how you actually allow that to become the play part, because that's what we need in business, not the serious part. We need to be joyful in the way that we work. That's what's going to make us get up every single day. So I'm going to share a little bit more about what makes me smile every single day. I've had, I guess, not a straightforward road in my career. And whilst I've been constant, in that finance has played a big part, there have been lots of twists and turns. That's life, right? But it's how I think now that I look back, the choices that I made along the way that has really enabled me to be where I am today. So I'm going to share parts of my story with you about those jagged moments. This photo is actually, or photos, represents a time in my life which was 7 years ago. That particular time was when my daughter, in fact, had sat down at a table and said, she was 16, I'm going to actually volunteer before I start uni and finish school next year. I want to volunteer and I want to spend some time overseas. And so she went down this path with friends of hers about where she wanted to volunteer. Now, after quite a lot of research, she landed with Africa. So the important bit with that is that her friends decided that America, Canada, and Fiji were where they wanted to go and volunteer. And she sat at the dining room table and said, that's not volunteering. That's not going to create an impact. But when she sat at that table to tell us her decision, Ebola had broken out. So I can tell you, as I sat across the table from her and my husband sat over there, he instantly went, no, you're not. Ebola has just broken out. She's somewhere else. So it was a really interesting period because in that time, it was the first thing that happened for me was, oh crap, she's got such conviction, right? That drive for her was really evident. She had done months of research, and yet I could see the panic and the fear in my husband's face. So for me, I put on my normal mitigating risk hat, my analysis, my strategy, solution focused, and sat there and went, well, we've got to actually talk this through, because I'm a really big believer when you have that sort of passion, then it needs to be honored. But I didn't want to leave my husband sitting there feeling like he wasn't being heard. And my son sat in the middle and went, go on, solve this one. So it was a really interesting situation. Now, it didn't get resolved instantly, let me tell you, but what we were able to do was to talk through all the obstacles, and there was a lot of friction. And that's one thing that in business, you know, you push through the biggest, I guess, solutions when you're able to actually meet at a friction point and go, you know what, there are differences here. But if we pause to actually better understand what's being said, you push through, and what comes out at the other end is in fact innovation. So with this, it was about mitigating risk, finding solutions, and then enabling her to, I guess, discover who she was. Now, my mitigating risk, in hindsight, maybe wasn't mitigating risk, because part of that agreement was she would go off for the first month on her own. And we set up the structure with projects abroad. So there was an element of safety. And then I would follow for the next 2 months, because she also wanted to live with a Maasai. And if any of you, understand the Maasai, they're in pretty remote areas, and well, there's not a lot there. So there's very limited water, there's very limited power. And there is so much that's unknown, and it was unknown for us. So that was my mitigating risk. We'll actually do the more, I guess, courageous part towards the end, and I'll be there with you. I don't know how that was mitigating risk, but it was, right, in my eyes. So here we are. I guess following her passion and her story. I'm going to skip down a little while to actually then say, 7 years down the track, that became so much of a passion, not just for me. We have been back several times, but that's now actually developed part of my business, which is Raise the Baseline, which is actually developing future leaders. And it's not just in developing countries, but that's what my whole focal point is that anything that I actually do in my paid work actually has an incredible focus as to why I'm actually doing it. And it is because I want to develop our future leaders. I want to develop them globally. I want to develop them here. I want to show our future generation that there's a different way of doing things, and that I am able to hear them. I'm able to actually create that journey with them. So I've developed 4 programs. They start at the age of 12. So it's at pinnacle points in their lives. The 12 to 14 as that transition, from primary school into high school. Then those challenging years, that 15 to 17-year-old where they're discovering who they are as at that precipice of becoming adults, but not quite. And there's so much emotions, that are actually surging through them. And then as they finish school, so whether they actually want to become leaders in the workplace, in corporate, or whether they actually want to become young entrepreneurs. So that's my E. That's what actually sits between my drive for the things that I do and my fear and my point of failure. And I'll actually talk about that a little bit more. But this gives you, I guess, a little bit of insight about who I am as a person and, what has actually led me to where I am today. So a few more things that I guess will help in the way that I actually look at things. So people often say to me, you look at things really differently, Cathy. And I think this is what I share when I mentor and coach people or I give advice in business. It is that slightly different lens. So, I look at these images and I see the salmon actually swimming upstream. And so for me, that is exactly who I am. Just because things are difficult doesn't mean that they can't be done. And in fact, the bear that actually sits at the top of that, cliff as the water actually gushes past and the salmon actually swim up into the face of that bear, that's me. And I guess I look at it as, fear actually is an emotion. I liken it to, if any of you have been athletes or, just before you step on a stage to talk, you get those rumbles in your stomach, that emotion. That's what fear is. It's an emotion. So we can use it in a slightly different way to what we have been taught. And when we actually face it front on, we push through, we go through boundaries, obstacles are no longer a barrier. So facing something head on actually demystifies what actually sits behind that. And that fear, that energy actually shifts. So I swim upstream and I actually encourage people to go against the grain, to actually do things differently, because that's where real creativity actually sits. And our future generation, they have the ability to think differently. So it's about giving us and giving them the opportunity to just listen to what else there is actually out there. The other thing that I have, I guess, learnt over the years is to pause. Whilst pausing, people go, well, I can't, I'm so busy that I actually just need to go forward. Pausing actually gives you time. Even though you think that you're stopping, what it does is it gives you the ability to crystallize exactly what is going on. So taking a moment to breathe and then to actually look inward is one of the biggest skills that, if I can share, for you to develop, will actually enhance what you're doing in business and in life. Looking inwards, I say that because often we actually look out. We look out to seek advice, we look out to see what other people are doing. But the reality is that we actually know what we want from life. And sometimes all that we need is that, I guess, milestone, those crystal clear stepping stones to actually get us to where we are, where we need to be. And that might be somebody who has actually walked that path. So seeking advice for specific things is really important, but to actually then compare when you're looking outward to what you want to do, it's a false pretense. I often say that what that is that you're looking at somebody's external self and then comparing it to your internal self. So take that, I guess, as a slightly different way to look at things. The microphone is something that I guess I didn't actually stand up. I wouldn't share my voice. I grew up in an environment where I guess I was the youngest and always amongst adults. And I was raised by my grandmother, and I recall actually many situations where I would be part of a discussion, but then when it would be replayed back, by each of them, it would be really different. That perspective that they each took away was so different, to what I heard, and then to the way that they would all play it back. And so I learned not to share my voice, just to actually sit back and allow people to say whatever they wanted. So I recognized that that was something that I needed to change for myself, because I had a voice and I had an opinion. And the other thing that I recognized about my voice is that whenever I felt that there was an injustice for somebody else, that's when I would find my voice. And I share that because that actually brings me back to the way that I do business. So my advocacy for people that I felt weren't, I guess, being heard, or there was, I guess, some sort of remiss, or they were being left out, I needed to step in. So that became, I guess, my values, of how I actually looked at things, both in business and personally. And then the next step is actually about the curtain, and I think as females, we don't need to actually stand up on stage. I think we know who we are, but stepping up on stage and actually screaming it out to the world has not been something that we have done. It's certainly not what I have done. But once again, I realized that how can somebody else know how to do something if they're not shown it? And so in the last couple of years, I have been conscious to actually be seen, to become heard, because it has been remiss of me to constantly be behind the scenes. You know that saying, you can't be what you can't see? That's really started to resonate for me. So that's a little bit about where I am today. Now, the other thing I guess that people often look at is, where they've actually come from somehow is who they are. And yes, that is true to some extent. But if I share with you, a story that not a lot of people know, it's actually around that dummy and the bottle of milk. Now, most of us know that, young kids actually have their bottles of milk, but they grow out of that really quickly, especially before they go to school, right? So there was obviously something in me that needed a bottle of milk right up until the age of 7. And I used to come home from school, because school was just 200 meters up the road, at recess and at lunch, to have a bottle of milk. So what does that say about me? Who should I be today if, I'm going to cling on to those things that I actually did, or who I was as a young child? I don't know, but I thought I'd share that with you. And then also share, I guess, the other image is, it's actually my dad. It's my dad's hand and me holding his hand in the last weeks, just before he passed away. He was a really significant part of my life, and he actually taught me the value of choice. And I think taking away, my learnings out of that, it's been that I was always afforded to choose how I wanted to actually step forward, to make the choices, whether he agreed with them or not. It became a discussion point. It didn't mean that we would often agree, and, I did some really silly things, but he afforded me that ability to choose. So we can take our learnings from our past and actually strengthen from them and then move forward. And that's a slightly different proposition to actually being resilient. It's actually about being anti-fragile. So I'm using this image because we all actually go through different stages of our lives. We all have good bits and we all have some really yucky moments, but at the end, we are who we are, and that is that beautiful butterfly. We all have the ability to spread our wings and to make a choice in how we want to step forward in life. And so I want you to remember this image and recognize Yes, you may not have done it right every single time. You've had bumpy roads. You've had maybe some ugly bits that you don't want to remember, but there is so much goodness that you've actually walked through to get to where you are today. Allow yourself the opportunity to recognize who you are and spread those wings and actually make the choices that you want to for yourself as you step forward. So, as I have actually shared part of my story, I guess you might be sitting there now thinking, you know, I don't know, your past, where you are today, what you want to do differently. Making your choice as you step forward is what's going to actually really allow you to go from that drive and push past your fear. So think about, what is it that you honestly want to commit to for yourself to be able to move forward? Nothing else really matters other than the choices that you choose to make and how committed you actually are. I have a little dog sitting in here, sitting at my feet at the moment, going in and out. So if I'm distracted, please excuse me. She's going in between my legs. You know, I actually said earlier that we sometimes actually look externally, you know, to what people are actually doing, and particularly more so now with social media. But the one thing that I want you to remember about those moments is it is that. It is 1 second, one moment in time that is captured and that is shared with all of us. And I'm no different to that. But when you compare it, because that's ultimately what we're doing, that's our initial, you know, engagement. It is to react to what we actually see. We are comparing to everything that we know about ourselves to that one split second in that moment that is actually happening for that person in that image that they're sharing. So it's not the full story. So as you look at that, make the choice. Who do you want to be as you step forward? What are the changes that you want to see? Because those changes aren't about anybody else. They're in fact about us. So in everything that I actually do, you know, Gandhi's quote, be the change that you want to see in the world. I actually live by that. You know, I often, or you will often hear me talking about the showing. You know, I'm very big on showing people, not telling them. And there is a big difference. You know, in most of the things that I actually do, I plan out a minimum of 18 months. And people go, how do you do that? Well, it's actually crystallized for the next 18 months. I usually go 5 years out. And when I work with businesses, I actually go beyond that. You know, most of the time I'm looking 20 years down the track. I crystallize that point, and then I actually work with them to navigate back. And so this image is actually about that. And I'm using images to allow you to have really simple things to draw on as you step away from this session today. So the blue button with the little pink symbol is actually what happens usually for all of us in life. It's the replay button. So when we have moments of crisis, when we have to make a really quick decision, it is innate in us. We go back to what we know, which is the replay button. So we play it safe. And I don't know if you can recall or, you know, reflect as I'm talking to you, but I'm sure that you will be able to recognize that there are certain patterns where you do default back to something that you already know. So being conscious of that in that moment is really important. And the reason why I'm asking you to do that is because that's when I'm going to ask you to pause. So instead of instantly going to the replay button, to pause. And I'm not going to ask you to actually press the play button, because when we press play, it's just about here and now. And life isn't about here and now. It's actually about what you want for the future. So the other button is fast forward. And that's how I play my game of life and business. It is, what do I want So my fast forward is immediately it's 18 months. Realistically, it's 5 years. So I know I have mapped out what I will be doing in 5 years. I absolutely know what I'm doing in the 18 months. And the reason why I'm sharing this is I'm going to give you a really simple framework of how to actually use this. So with the fast forward button, if you identify what you want in whatever the period is that you're comfortable with, so for me, it's absolutely 18 months. The question that you actually ask, and this is a tip, right? So I'm giving you golden nuggets. All that you have to do is identify one quick question or two quick questions. Is what I'm doing today getting me closer to where I actually want to be or further away? And that's all you have to do. It is really, really simple. Does that make sense? I hope so. So what that actual behavior does, ladies, is that it actually then creates a new pathway forward. Just by actually implementing that one simple change in the way that you actually will react, it will be with a response, not with react, right? And that changes the neural pathways in your brain. Now, the other thing that I want to share with you around the neural pathways that actually occur in our brain is that we, all of us have fear. There's no denying that. There is trepidation in, a few things that we're confronted with. But what I want to allow you to understand is that the reason why most of us hold back when we experience fear is because the part in our brain that's actually triggered, it's the FRMI, have actually done studies around this. It is the same part of your brain that actually experiences severe pain, like physical pain. So when you have anything in front of you or you are experiencing fear, it triggers the same part of your brain. And so therefore you experience that intensity that you would experience when you are, physically in pain. So it makes us actually stop. So if you understand that and you recognize that that's all that's actually happening, then it takes away, that emotion that's sitting there so you understand the clarity of why you are actually feeling like that to be able to push through. The other thing that often happens around fear is that we associate it also with failure. So I'm going to tell you how necessary failure actually is in business and in life. If we don't fail at things, how do you then learn? As children, what did we actually learn? What did we hear from our parents, from those around us? Oh, it's okay. Have another go. But somehow as adults, we lose that sight. We forget that it's actually through experiencing something that we then allow ourselves to find another way to do it, or that we strengthen from it. And again, that goes back to the difference between resilience and anti-fragility, because it is through the actual lessons of failing that we then strengthen and then move forward. Now, trust and confidence. If you liken business to your family life, what are the things that are, I guess, enable that bondness to actually occur in family? It's trust. No matter what happens in a family, whether you agree, whether you disagree, you trust that the other person is still going to be there for you. You are confident, in fact, that they're going to be there for you. And so therefore, if you actually integrate that into business as well, it's not going to just change you, it actually impacts everybody around you. So if you have trust in who you're actually working with, they then have trust with the clients as well. It has this ripple effect. So from a values perspective, they're two things that are actually integral in the way that I do business. So I ask you to think about what's important for you. When I shared earlier, around the way that I guess I look at that fast forward button, I'm sharing these, again, images with you so that you have things that just quickly actually sit in the back of your mind when things happen for you. So what it does is, my fast forward button is my stability piece. I know exactly where I'm actually going. So I know where I am and where I want to be. So it's almost like understanding my boundaries. And then what happens, if I look at the other image that you're looking at, you have, the little cubicles. I call them my little filing cabinets. It's where I actually store all the information that I need, and then I draw on them, as I need them. It's actually a tip, not for this session, but how you can actually recall information. Really good for exam sitting for young kids. But what's important is that you actually know that this is the path, this is where all of my structure actually sits. And then it actually allows for the fluid part of your brain to actually occur. So that fast forward button actually gives us the ability to then actually have this flow that actually occurs in between, which also incorporates our joy. Our ability to actually incorporate all the bits in between that we want to do, that bring us happiness, and know that everything else is actually really stable. We know exactly what we need to do. We know where to find it. We know where to position them, and we know where we actually are going. So it allows us not to have that confusion and that angst that, potentially sits in all of us as entrepreneurs, as business owners. Letting go once you go home to do, it's okay, I've left work at work. This is the way that we actually do it. So it's actually creating the structure, but allowing a flow to occur in between. Now, I know that you're actually looking, at this image and thinking, how does that actually relate? But it is so relevant in business. As entrepreneurs, usually you're visionaries. You actually have that image of what it's going to look like as, you're exiting the business. Well, if you're not there yet, you will be, because that's what we're all working towards. So having that incredible clarity about what your business looks like is great for you. But the importance then is actually to bring everybody else on that journey with you. So if you're jumping out of a plane, if you're all jumping out of a plane, what's the formation? How are you actually going to pull everybody together? So being able to have that sort of clarity is really important. It then actually enables others to identify how they're going to contribute. They know exactly what their purpose is. They also know the timing that needs to take place. So if you can imagine, if everybody jumps out and they all jump out together, is it going to be possible? No, because not everybody can fit through that door, right? But how do they know who's going to then connect with who either? They don't know that either. So actually being clear about what it is that you're wanting to achieve and then communicating that, setting expectations around it, is how we actually navigate that pathway forward for everybody involved, including your family. What are the expectations of you, of them, as part of the business, whether they're in the business with you or whether they're not? What are the expectations of not just your employees, but from your clients? What do they expect of you? Really being able to communicate every piece of that puzzle that sits within your business and your vision is really important. It also then articulates for everybody how they actually need to be performing, to know that they are contributing in the way that you want them to. These statistics are really interesting. We certainly learn a lot, from things that we have experienced, things that we actually live, I say lived experiences, then the next bit of learning actually comes from those around us, from general feedback, from actually hearing other people's experiences and adapting them, but also actually having people in your business share some of their, I guess, thoughts, concept, ideas. It enables us to think differently. But then that final piece, which is the piece that we actually need to almost bring that point of crystallization together, is that formal piece of learning. Now, for some, that might actually be education through, university, tech, whatever. But it also in business comes from somebody who has walked your path. But that's something that we don't often invest in. I can tell you that over the years, I have had many people who have actually not just mentored me, but I have actually engaged, for different parts of what I want to achieve. Even though we know what we're doing, we have skills, we also have blind spots. And that's the reason why I'm so committed to the way that I actually invest in my ongoing learning. I'm about to consider actually doing another degree. So it's actually neuroscience. For me, I guess I'm always looking to better understand. So it's not just to better understanding what I'm hearing, in conversations, it's actually to better understand what is new in the world. So I guess I'm an eternal learner. So think about what is it that's actually going to enable you to get that final 10%, or I call it the last 5%, to enhance what you already know. So setting expectations, this last segment has really been about setting expectations around you and around those around you. And when we're clear around that, the path forward is clear for everyone, and we're actually rowing the same boat, but also our oars are going in the same direction at the same time. The other thing around expectation is it's not just around performance. The one thing that I think, particularly in large organizations, that's missed, as you get more and more people into the team, behavioral expectations is really key. That actually sets the benchmark around the culture and how people identify who you are as a business. I'm going to share a story. I actually was working, and this was this company I was working with for probably about 18 months. I was engaged to actually scale the business and to also incorporate a brand new part of the business, so setting up an entire new entity. And as I was looking at the business, I was engaged then across the entire operations, across different continents. But one of the things that struck me is that whilst I was actually looking at scaling, from a sales point of view, the team was motivated. From an operational point of view, they knew what they needed to do, and there were a few things that we needed to enhance. However, there was a disconnect between the two. So sales were so focused on just getting sales in and didn't really care about the machinations and the impact that it had on the operations. So they were just getting things in the door. But what that did was, the impact was that operations were working 4 times harder because sales were just pushing things in the door and going, just fix it, just fix it, just fix it. To the point where they were at so much at loggerheads that the behavior that actually occurred in those interactions was really not healthy. So whilst sales could actually be, I guess, recognized for their incredible contributions in increasing performance and increasing the volumes, the behavior in which they did it wasn't acceptable. So the impact across the business was that it ended up costing money because there was so much overtime. They needed to keep employing people. So behaviors, the expectations around that actually stems from the top all the way through. So be conscious about what expectations actually means in a business. So now I get to, what is that E for you? And just remember, whilst I'm actually talking about E, it can be anything, but I'm going to just share a few things of what E actually means. So E can actually stand for the expectations, but there is other things that it can in fact represent. So it's actually about reframing where you're going to go and how you want to do it. So today, draw that line in the sand and identify what E actually means for you. So for me, all of these actually form my E. They actually are entrenched in the way that I actually look at things. So it is understanding that I will always go to, as a default, to my fast forward button, not my replay button. I'm very big about education. So in fact, I shared with you earlier around my Raise the Baseline programs. That is all about education. So in everything that I am actually engaged in, it is about engaging, empowering, and enlisting the knowledge in the people that I actually work with, so that I make myself redundant. That's, for me, gifting knowledge, is what it's actually all about. I often say that knowledge is really only of value when it's shared. If it just sits in our own head, what impact is it going to make? It's not. So education is really important in everything that I actually do. And the reason why that is so important to me is that it actually enriches the lives of others. So the Raise the Baseline program, it is actually about enriching those young children, but also then enabling them, because part of the lessons and part of the learnings is about paying it forward. So it's not just about enriching them, it's actually about showing them the value in enriching the lives of those around them as well. Ethics, that actually sits at the core of everything that I do. So my boundaries, I'm really clear around my values and my boundaries in business. If my values don't align with the people that I'm engaged with, then I'm not the right person for them. And I'm actually okay to pass it on to somebody else. And finding your edge. Where is your place of genius? I know where I sit with my place of genius. But finding that in your business, that actually makes you stand out from the crowd. It also actually enables you to have that real crystal clear pinhead, vision as to where you're going and who you actually are. And I share this, and it's interesting because Peace and Katie actually started with this. What are we actually grateful for? Thinking about every single day, what is it that you're grateful for? What are you actually working towards? I think that that's something that when we learn to do that every single day and we incorporate that in our lives and in our business, then you know what? We're actually enough. We're doing what we're actually meant to be doing. This little symbol, and I call it the little pricks. It's little pricks because of, the pins, the needles that are actually going to pop things. So, as kids, we're actually raised with this incredible, understanding that we can be anything, we can do anything. And as we get older, that sort of starts to deflate. But we allow that in some ways to happen. So I share this image of the balloons and the little pricks message, because I want you to remember that what we actually allow ourselves to take in will then inevitably take away a little bit of our helium, a little bit of our actual oomph that sits inside those balloons that keep them plump. So every time we feel irritated, think about, is this something that I can control? And if it's not, let it go. Otherwise, it will actually put a little pin in that, in your inner soul, and it'll actually deflate you. And bit by bit, we actually give away power. So I want you to think about that, think about where you want to invest your time, because we only have a certain amount of time. We can't get it back. So invest wisely and allow the little things that irritate you to just float away and not allow it to actually prick into that inner soul of yours. And here's another little lesson that I share. We have actually been shown how to respond to certain situations. So we have an event that occurs, we instantly put up our hand. We've been taught that, you know, from young children in the classroom, we respond and then we actually get an outcome. So here's a little tip, another little golden moment. I want you to reverse that. There will always be an event. There will always be a discussion. There will always be, you know, something that actually comes up. So we recognize that, but actually pause in that moment. Do it before you respond and be really clear about shifting the outcome to that point in time before you respond. The reason why I say that is you'll actually get a different outcome. And the reason why I actually suggest that you understand your outcome before you give a response is because I also want you to think about how will you achieve an outcome that's a win-win before you respond. That's going to enable you to really think about what are you prepared to compromise? Because in that moment, you are responding and not reacting. You're not going back to a default. You're not going back to replay. Now, I shared earlier, you know, around the fact that so many people actually have failure attached to fear. And yet, you know, I've enabled you to understand the reasons why fear actually becomes so impactful in the way that you know, we feel, the emotion that actually it elicits. And then I've shared with you the benefits of failure. And I'm sure that not too many people will actually share that failure is a good thing with you. I promise you that the moment that we actually allow ourselves to shift the way that we look at failure, you'll be able to embrace it. You'll have so many breakthroughs in business and the way that you actually look at innovation and actually scaling your business that you'll sit back and go, I don't know why I've actually allowed that to impede me, you know, to actually stop me. There will be many people that will tell you, don't do that. That's actually really risky. But thinking about how you can mitigate risk to actually prevent catastrophic failure, that's what the key is. So I hope that you now can understand how just shifting your lens slightly and actually applying certain measures can actually enable you to keep going. Have this image, you know, in your head and actually know that you can actually plan for failure as part of your business. You know, there are a lot of strategies and workshops that I actually run that actually enable you to have somebody in your business that actually does that, that prepares for failure. And building that into your business then allows what I actually call psychological safety to also occur in business, particularly now, you know, that we have got so, we are working at such a fast-paced environment at the moment. You know, everything that we're actually doing now is almost, I don't know, it's really not even relevant for what we're going to need in the next couple of years. It's going to become, you know, superfluous. So we have to keep actually thinking so far ahead that it's almost frightening. So we need somebody in business to understand or to be that person that says, it's okay, you know, I want you to have a go. And it doesn't matter if you fail. What we'll be able to take away from that is what has worked. And then just work on those few little things that we need to tweak to actually make it work. So it leads me to, I guess, you know, this next point. It is what we do with the failings that really is going to become the impact that you have, not just in business, but in your life too, and in the way that you step forward. It's also actually going to impact the way that your kids look at things. So think about, you know, what is it that you actually want to show those around you, whether it's family or whether it's actually colleagues or whether it's your staff. So changing your lens, again, keeping things really simple, guys. You know, for me, if you actually have something that needs to change, it's about keeping it simple. If you have something that's really complicated, it means that we have to find another way of making things incredibly simple to move forward. So this is another tip, tool to keep into your little toolbox. What happens if you don't like something? You know, I use the analogy of the TV. If you're watching something and you don't like it, what do? You switch the channel. And if you don't like anything that's actually sitting in front of you, what do? You turn the TV off. You actually go away and you do something else. Well, in business, this is the same. In life, it's the same. If you don't like what's actually out there, turn it off. Do something different. Make it your own. But step forward and make a choice. Change the lens in which you actually see things. I shared earlier, the difference about resilience. We all talk about resilience, and it is an incredible trait. Resiliency actually enables us to walk through challenges. The difference is, as I have shared with antifragility, is that it actually enables us not just to walk through it, but to actually look back and go, what can I take away? What are the lessons that I have actually learned by walking through it that I can draw on, that I can enhance, that I can strengthen from, that I can then share with those around me and make it different as we step forward? It is always to have that ability of having that second order thinking as well. Having plan B needs to actually form part of what we actually do in life. That second order thinking, third order thinking actually becomes the way that, I say, what else? So if I'm going from plan A to plan B, each of the steps in between has got a path, it's got a roadmap. I create it. But at each of those roadmaps, what I then do is go, all right, so if I actually take this step, what happens if that fails? What are my other options? It's almost like going camping. You go camping and you're going to go to a powered site. Great, you've got all of the connections. But what happens if there is an outage? What happens if there's a surge? Do you go prepared? Do you have that, torch? Do you have a torch? Do you have a lantern? What else do you have? You plan ahead. Well, this is the same in business. It's not just about the one roadmap. It is actually about making sure you have a backup at each stage. That also then prevents that catastrophic, failure point that I talked about. It means that we're always prepared that there will be some points of failure. But it's okay, because we'll actually have another option to step into. So success, everything that I've shared today is really about the success. But what success looks like for you is what it looks like for you. It doesn't matter what it is for anybody else. But the one thing that I will share, and if any of you are actually familiar with NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, there is so much power in what actually sits behind our actual thought process and in fact, in what we say. So these two things are so valid. And if I was actually sitting there with you, I'd show you physically what actually happens when you think about something to your body. When you say something to your body, it impacts. So please be mindful. What you choose to say is in fact what will happen. What you think is what will happen. So as you step forward, make that a change in you. So where to now? There's some key points. Be committed, be committed to whatever it is that you want to do. That doesn't mean that you can't change your mind, but when you actually step forward, choose who you actually want to be. Strengthen from what your lived experiences have been. and don't actually allow them to be the shackle that actually sits with you and ties you down. Learn from them. It's okay. That's how we actually strengthen. And what's the other one? Know the outcome. Sorry. Know the outcome that you actually want before you go and respond to something. And be prepared to actually compromise, because everything in life is actually about a win-win. But most importantly, make that decision now. Choose what that actually looks like for you. Now, I've got a whole lot of, interestingly, my background is actually finance, but I think in my old age, I have become really passionate and committed to sharing knowledge. That I have got free resources and blogs all over my website. Download them. Use what you can actually take away that's going to be helpful for you. I've even got snippets of budgets and cash flows, and I make it really, really simple. I think one of the segments is, having budgets on the runway. It's really about making, how I said earlier, complex things just need to be made even more simpler. That's what my philosophy actually is. And today, it's actually about women that change the world. Be the woman that you want to be, that actually changes the world. I'm so excited to be collaborating with Peace and Cathy and all the women that are actually part of this book. Their stories are actually there to actually show you that it can be done. So be brave, step forward, and be the change that you want to see. If you want to work with me, there's lots of ways that I actually work with people, whether it's a one-on-one or actually being part of a group session, or as a speaking engagement. And where do you find me? Here's all the places that you can actually find me. I'm really here to gift knowledge. It's been one of my pleasures in actually being part of this community. People have felt really comfortable, and I'm really privileged that they have trusted in reaching out, just to, share ideas. So thank you to Peace and Cathy for actually including me, not just in the book, but in this community. And I hope that, this presentation has been of use and help to you. And I'm going to open it up for questions.
Thank you so much, Cathy.
Pleasure.
Thank you. We're out of time now because our next session is starting. So we don't have time for questions, but I do encourage people to reach out to you directly. They can find you on LinkedIn and at Instagram and at your website, Solutions to You. So thank you so much for your session today.
Oh, pleasure. Sorry I overran, guys.
No, you're right on time.
Okay.
So we will keep going, but thank you